I changed the beneficiary, Sarah. It was the only way to protect it.
Who did you change it to, Dad?
Arthur Penwright was never a man for secrets. At 69, his life was an open book, its pages filled with the neat, predictable arithmetic of a retired civil engineer. His checkbook balanced to the penny. His retirement portfolio was a masterclass in sensible diversification. He and his wife, Eleanor, had built a life on the sturdy foundation of shared truths and mutual understanding, or so he believed. Or so. It felt like a manageable task, a project with a clear beginning and end, unlike the amorphous, endless landscape of his sorrow. Eleanor had been a voracious reader, and her books were her treasures, crammed onto shelves in every room, stacked on end tables, piled by her favorite armchair. They were an extension of her mind, a map of her interests and passions, from the wilds of nature to the dark alleyways of detective fiction. He started in the living room, running his fingers over the worn spines, each one a small, tangible memory. There was the collection of Mary Oliver poems he'd given her for their 30th anniversary, its pages filled with her faint pencil underlinings, next to passages about the fierce, unapologetic beauty of the natural world. He found the dog-eared mystery novels she consumed in a single sitting, their plots forgotten as soon as she turned the last page, the thrill being in the chase. There were the heavy historical tomes she read with studious attention, challenging his own understanding of the world with facts and perspectives he'd never considered. He could almost hear her voice saying, "But Arthur, have you thought about it from their point of view?" He was pulling down her old college copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, a volume whose cover was soft as cloth from decades of handling, when it happened. He remembered her reading from it on their honeymoon in the Berkshires, her voice melodic and full of youthful passion as she recited lines about the beauty of the common and the interconnectedness of all things. "I believe a leaf of grass is no less than the journey work of the stars," she had read, her eyes bright with a profound sincerity that had captivated him from the moment they met. He smiled at the memory, a brief, fragile warmth in the cold cavern of his chest. As he tipped the book, a single sheet of thick paper, folded in three, slipped from between the pages and drifted to the floor like a silent white leaf. It landed face up. The bold blue logo of a brokerage firm he didn't recognize, Vanguard Financial, Boston, stared up at him. His first thought was that it was junk mail she had used as a bookmark. Eleanor was practical like that, always finding a second use for things. But then his engineer's eyes caught the numbers, the neat columns and precise decimal points, and the thought evaporated. The document was a quarterly statement, pristine and official. The font was sharp, the lines precise. It felt alien in his hands, a missive from a world he didn't know existed. For 32 years, a portion of her nurse's salary, a steady, automatic deduction, had flowed into an account he never knew existed. The final balance, printed at the bottom of a column of meticulous transactions, was staggering. $374,812.41. The number didn't compute. It was an error, a phantom sum. He reread it, his lips moving silently. It was a sum that could have reshaped their entire retirement, funded decades of the world travel she had dreamed of, the river cruise down the Danube, the trip to see the cherry blossoms in Japan, but that he had deemed too extravagant, too much of a risk to their carefully constructed financial fortress. It could have provided an even more comfortable cushion for their daughter, Sarah, buying her a larger house, securing her children's college funds without question. It was a life-altering amount of money. But it was the name on the account, the sole beneficiary listed in stark, unforgiving print, that stopped the air in his lungs and turned the blood in his veins to ice. It wasn't his name. It wasn't Sarah's. It was a name he had never seen before. Daniel Petrov. A stranger was about to inherit his wife's secret life. For 45 years, their financial world had moved with the gentle, predictable rhythm of that grandfather clock. Arthur was the architect of their fiscal security, a role he cherished and took with the utmost seriousness. Every Friday evening, without fail, he'd sit at the cherry-wood desk in his study, the one he'd inherited from his father, switch on the green-shaded banker's lamp and pore over their finances. The ritual was his sanctuary, a bastion of logic and order in an often unpredictable world. 3 weeks after her funeral, in the suffocating quiet of their shared home, he discovered her ledger. It wasn't a book of household expenses, but a single, pristine brokerage statement tucked inside a dusty copy of Leaves of Grass. For 32 years, a portion of her nurse's salary had flowed into an account he never knew existed. The balance was staggering, a sum that could have reshaped their entire retirement. He had spreadsheets for everything: mortgage amortization, projected Social Security benefits, the slow and steady growth of their 401ks. He loved the clean logic of it all, the immutable truth of mathematics, the way numbers, when treated with respect, could build a fortress against the chaos of illness, unemployment, and all the other specters that haunted the modern world. Eleanor used to tease him about it. She'd lean in the doorway, a mug of chamomile tea warming her hands, the steam clouding her glasses, her presence a soft, comforting counterpoint to the sharp clicking of his calculator. A wry smile would play on her lips. "Still counting your dragons, dear?" she'd ask, her voice a gentle melody. He wouldn't look up, but a smile would touch his own lips. "These dragons pay for that expensive tea, my love," he'd retort, pointing his pen at a column of figures, "and for the roof over our heads and the gas in the car." "I know, Arthur. I know you keep us safe," she would say, her tone shifting from teasing to sincere, and she would come over and place a hand on his shoulder. "You're our rock," and he would feel a swell of pride. He was protecting them. That was his job. His love language was a well-funded IRA, a paid-off mortgage, a future unburdened by debt. Eleanor's approach to money was, to his orderly mind, dangerously poetic. She spoke of money in terms of what it could do, not what it was. It was a new set of scrubs for a young colleague whose own were worn thin. "She's working 2 jobs to put her son through community college, Arthur. She can't afford them, and she's too proud to ask." It was a plane ticket for Sarah to study abroad in Spain, an experience he'd initially balked at due to the cost. "She'll learn more in those 3 months than in 4 years of textbooks," Eleanor had argued, her conviction unwavering, and she'd been right. It was the ridiculously expensive bag of premium birdseed for the cardinals that nested in the dogwood tree outside their kitchen window. "You can't put a price on that shade of red, Arthur," she'd say with a serene finality that brooked no argument. He saw money as a shield, a bulwark. She saw it as a current, something that had to flow to have any meaning, like love or kindness. This fundamental difference was a source of gentle, recurring friction. He remembered one specific argument, maybe 10 years ago, that now echoed in his mind with a sinister new resonance. Her cousin's family was in trouble. A layoff, a medical bill, the usual litany of modern struggles. Eleanor wanted to give them $10,000. He had been appalled. He'd pulled out the charts, the 5-year plan, the projections. "Ellie, look," he'd said, his voice tight with reason, tapping a red line on a graph representing their liquid savings. "This sets back our major home repair fund by a year. If the furnace goes this winter, we're exposed. It's an unacceptable risk." Eleanor had looked not at his charts, but at him, her gaze clear and unwavering. "Arthur, that is a hypothetical furnace. My cousin's daughter needs braces. That is a real child in real pain." "We have enough," she had insisted, her voice calm and certain. "We have more than enough." He had believed her. He had conceded, as he often did, to the quiet force of her conviction. And she was right. Their life was comfortable, a testament to his careful planning and her steady income. They lived in a modest but well-maintained colonial in a leafy New Jersey suburb. They'd paid off the mortgage 7 years ago, a day Arthur had marked on the calendar with a triumphant red circle. He thought he knew everything about their financial landscape, every stream, every pond, every tributary. He had mapped the entire territory. The idea that she had maintained a secret, significant account for over 3 decades was not just surprising. It was geologically impossible. It was like finding a secret ocean in their backyard. It upended the very physics of their marriage, the trusted calculus of their shared existence. His first reaction was a cold, sharp spike of betrayal that sliced through the dull fog of grief. The sorrow morphed into something hot and acidic that churned in his stomach. Who was this man? The name was unfamiliar, a harsh, foreign sound in the quiet Anglo-Saxon symphony of their life. He pronounced it aloud, the syllables feeling like stones in his mouth. Daniel Petrov. An affair? But it was the name on the account, the sole beneficiary listed in stark, unforgiving print, that stopped the air in his lungs. It wasn't his name. It wasn't their daughter's. It was a name he had never seen before, Daniel Petrov. A stranger was about to inherit his wife's secret life. Arthur Penright was never a man for secrets. At 69, his life was an open book, its pages filled with the neat, predictable arithmetic of a retired civil engineer. His checkbook balanced to the penny. The thought was a grotesque violation, a desecration of the woman he knew, the woman who had held his hand through his mother's long illness, who had cried with him at his father's funeral, who had celebrated every small victory with a joy so pure it was infectious. Eleanor was the embodiment of loyalty, of quiet strength and unwavering devotion. But what other explanation could there be? 32 years. He did the math, his mind clicking like an abacus. The contributions had started just after Sarah was born. A secret kept for their entire life together, a hidden river of money flowing silently beneath the bedrock of their marriage, destined for a stranger. He sank into her reading chair, the damask fabric cool against his skin, the brokerage statement trembling in his hand. The room felt suddenly cold, alien. The familiar objects on the mantelpiece, a photo of Sarah in her graduation gown, a piece of sea glass they'd found on a beach in Maine, seeming like props on a stage. He was a stranger in his own home, married to a woman he now realized he may have never truly known. The fortress he had so carefully built with his numbers felt like it was turning to sand, slipping through his fingers, and he was left exposed and utterly alone. In the days that followed, Arthur's grief was eclipsed by a burning, obsessive need to understand. The question of who was a relentless drumbeat in his mind, a maddening rhythm that kept him from sleeping, from eating, from thinking of anything else. He would wake in the middle of the night, the name Daniel Petrov echoing in the absolute darkness of their bedroom, and pad downstairs to his study. There, under the green glow of his desk lamp, he would stare at the single sheet of paper as if it were a coded message from an enemy state. The statement offered few clues. It was from a reputable firm based in Boston. The mailing address for the statements was a P.O. box in a town he'd never heard of, North Creek, New York. And the contributions were like clockwork. $100 a month, every month, for 32 years. A small amount, almost unnoticeable on its own, but compounded over decades with dividends reinvested, it had grown into a formidable sum. Eleanor, his poetic, financially carefree Eleanor, had been secretly playing the long game with the precision of a Wall Street analyst. The irony was a bitter pill he could not swallow. His first logical step was to call the brokerage firm. He spent an entire morning navigating an automated phone tree, his frustration mounting with each synthesized voice prompt. For English, press 1. To access your account, please enter your 16-digit account number, followed by the pound sign. He stabbed at the keypad, his fingers slipping with sweat. Finally, by repeatedly pressing 0, a tactic he'd learned from years of dealing with utility companies, he broke through to a human being. A young man, his voice slick with corporate politeness and a practiced insincere empathy. Vanguard Financial, this is Kevin speaking. How may I help you today? My name is Arthur Penright, Arthur began, trying to keep his voice steady, professional. My wife, Eleanor Penright, recently passed away. It appears she held an account with your firm. I'm very sorry for your loss, Mr. Penright, Kevin said, the words smooth and automatic. I can certainly help you with that. Do you have her account number? No, I don't. I have a statement. It seems I'm not the beneficiary. The beneficiary is a man named Daniel Petrov. A pause. The clicking of a keyboard, a sound that felt miles away. I see. And how can I help you, sir? I am the executor of my wife's will. I need to understand this. I need to know who this person is, what his relationship to my wife was. He heard the pleading tone in his own voice and hated it. It sounded weak, desperate. "I understand your concern, Mr. Penright," Kevin said, his tone shifting from helpful to guarded. "However, due to client confidentiality and federal privacy regulations, I cannot disclose any information about another account holder or their beneficiaries without a court order or explicit legal authorization." "But she was my wife for 45 years. Arthur's voice rose, cracking with frustration. "This is a part of her estate. I have a right to know." "I'm sorry, sir," the voice said, smooth and impenetrable as a sheet of glass. "Our policies are in place to protect all of our clients." His retirement portfolio was a masterclass in sensible diversification. He and his wife, Eleanor, had built a life on the sturdy foundation of shared truths and mutual understanding, a fortress against the unpredictable tides of the world. Or so he believed. The 3 weeks since her funeral had been a study in dislocation. The house, their home of 45 years, had become an echo chamber, amplifying her absence with every deliberate, heavy tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. "I cannot provide any personal details. My hands are tied." He hung up the phone, the receiver slick in his palm, his heart pounding with a mixture of anger and impotence. The system he had always trusted, the world of rules and regulations, was now working against him, protecting her secret, leaving him on the outside looking in. His daughter Sarah came over for dinner that weekend, bringing a lasagna that tasted like cardboard in his mouth. She watched him with worried eyes as he moved restlessly around the kitchen, picking at things, unable to settle. "Dad, you need to rest," she said, her voice gentle as a hand on his shoulder. "You look exhausted. You haven't shaved." He finally broke. He retrieved the statement from his desk drawer and slid it across the polished surface of the kitchen table. It landed next to the salt shaker. "Your mother had a secret," he said, the words tasting like poison. Sarah studied the paper, her brow furrowed in confusion, the same confusion he had felt. $374,000? Wow. I didn't know Mom was such a savvy investor. Then she saw the name. Her eyes widened. "Daniel Petrov? Who's that?" she asked, mirroring his own bewilderment. "That's what I intend to find out," he replied, his voice harder than he intended. Sarah's concern deepened into alarm. She looked from the paper to his haggard face. "Dad, maybe you should let it go. Mom is gone." "Does it really matter now? This is just going to torture you. What if it's nothing? What if it's something you don't want to know?" He saw the logic in her words, the loving desire to protect him from further pain. But it was too late. The mystery had taken root in him, a tenacious weed in the barren soil of his grief. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about his memory of Eleanor. He had to know if the woman he had loved for 45 years was the woman he thought she was. Was she a liar, a secret adulterer, or something else entirely? The not knowing was the thing that was truly torturing him. He was an engineer. He solved problems. This was the most important problem of his life. That night, he began his own investigation. He turned their house upside down, searching for a clue, a name, a letter, anything that might connect Eleanor to this phantom. He started in the attic, a place of stored memories and forgotten treasures. The air was thick with the scent of dust, cedar, and time itself. A single bare bulb cast long, distorted shadows that made familiar shapes seem monstrous. He opened old trunks filled with her nursing school uniforms, their white fabric yellowed with age. He sorted through boxes of Sarah's childhood drawings and report cards, each one a pang of sweet, lost time. He found his own love letters to her, written during a business trip to Chicago in the 80s, tied in a faded blue ribbon. He had to sit down on a dusty trunk, the words blurring through a sudden film of tears, his own youthful sincerity a ghost from another life. "My dearest Ellie," one began, "this city is impressive, but all its steel and glass is gray without you." How could the woman who saved those letters be capable of such a profound deception? He found photo albums spanning their entire lives together. Their wedding. Him in a ridiculous powder blue tuxedo, her radiant. The day they brought Sarah home from the hospital, both of them looking terrified and ecstatic, Vacations to the Grand Canyon, birthdays, Christmases. In every picture, Eleanor's smile was luminous, genuine. He searched her face in the glossy photographs with a magnifying glass from his desk, his engineer's eye looking for a hint of deceit, a shadow of a secret, and found nothing but the open, loving gaze he knew so well. It made no sense. He felt like he was losing his mind, caught between the evidence in his hand and the evidence of his heart. He moved from the attic to her desk in the spare bedroom, a space she'd kept meticulously organized. He went through her address book, page by page. No Petrov. He checked old diaries from decades ago, his hands shaking with a feeling of violation as he read her looping script detailing everyday concerns: a leaky faucet, Sarah's flu, a difficult patient at the hospital. There was no mention of a Daniel, no hint of a secret life. The search yielded nothing. The name Daniel Petrov was nowhere to be found in the carefully curated archive of their life together. The man was a ghost, and Eleanor had been his willing accomplice. Weeks bled into a month. Grief was not the cinematic storm of weeping he might have expected. It was a low-pressure system that had settled over him, a persistent gray drizzle in his soul that made the air thick and breathing a conscious effort. He would wake in the morning to the cold, undisturbed stillness of her side of the bed and feel a fresh, sharp pang of surprise, as if he'd forgotten overnight that she was gone. The indentation on her pillow, a perfect cradle for her head, was gone. Arthur's quiet, orderly retirement had descended into a chaotic, single-minded quest. He neglected his garden, the tomato plants drooping on their vines, unwatered. He stopped answering the phone when his friends from the club called to check in. George, his weekly coffee partner, left 3 messages, then showed up at the door one afternoon. Arthur saw him through the peephole and just stood there, motionless, until George finally gave up and walked away. The house grew messier, stacks of papers and old boxes accumulating in the living room like monuments to his frustration. Sarah's visits became more frequent, her gentle prompts about grief counseling becoming more insistent. "Dad, this isn't healthy," she pleaded one afternoon, gesturing at the disarray, the cold pizza box on the coffee table. "You're letting this one thing erase 45 years of a good marriage. Mom loved you. That was real. Whatever this is, don't let it poison that. Please, for me, talk to someone. Or just let it go." He knew she was right on a logical level, but logic had deserted him. The problem of Daniel Petrov was an unsolved equation, an engineering flaw in the structure of his life, and he couldn't rest until he had found the error and understood its origin. He decided to change tactics. Instead of looking for the name itself, he started looking for a time and a place. The P.O. box was in North Creek, New York, a small town in the Adirondacks. Had they ever been there? He pulled out old road maps and vacation itineraries, spreading them across the dining room table. They'd driven through the Adirondacks once, on their way to Montreal, but that was in the fall of '98. The account was opened in the spring of '91. There was no connection. He felt a familiar surge of despair, a gray wave washing over him. He was about to give up for the night, the weight of his failure pressing down on him, when a new thought struck him, a flicker of light in the fog. The statement was tucked inside leaves of grass. It wasn't a random hiding place. Eleanor did nothing randomly. The book itself had to be a clue. He fetched the old volume, its cover soft and worn. He opened it carefully, half expecting a name to be underlined, a note to be tucked in the margins. Nothing. Just the familiar, sprawling verses of Whitman. He was about to put it back on the shelf, his shoulders slumping in defeat, when his thumb brushed against the inside of the back cover. He felt a slight bulge, a stiffness in the cardboard sleeve where the paper had been glued to the board. His heart began to beat faster. Tucked deep inside, almost completely hidden by the end paper, was a small, folded piece of newsprint, yellowed and brittle with age. It was so old the fold lines were as thin as spider silk and threatened to tear. With hands that trembled, he used the tip of a letter opener to carefully work it free. He unfolded it on his desk blotter, his breath held. It was a clipping from a local newspaper, the Warrensburg Lake George News, dated February 12, 1981. The headline was small, unassuming, buried on an inside page. Local nurse survives icy ordeal on Route 28. He began to read, his breath catching in his throat. The article described a single-car accident during a sudden violent blizzard. A young nurse, on her way home from a late shift at a Glens Falls clinic, had lost control of her car on the treacherous, snow-covered road. Her car had spun into a deep ravine, hidden from the main road by a curtain of snow-laden pines. She was injured, her leg broken, unable to move, with the temperature dropping into the single digits. Her name was Eleanor Vance. Her maiden name. He read on, his heart hammering against his rib. On. For hours she lay in the freezing darkness, drifting in and out of consciousness, the snow piling up around the shattered windows. Just when she was giving up hope, convinced she would die there, a lone truck driver, struggling to get his rig through the storm, spotted the faint, intermittent glimmer of a broken taillight down in the gully. A tiny spark of red in a world of white. He stopped his truck. A dangerous move on the icy road, fought his way down the snowy embankment, the wind tearing at him, and pulled her from the wreckage. He wrapped her in his own heavy coat and half-carried, half-dragged her back up to his cab, starting the engine to blast the heat and keep them warm until a state trooper finally found them hours later. The article ended with a quote from the trooper, praising the driver's heroism. The faint, unique scent of her, part lavender soap, part the hospital clean smell of her scrubs, a fragrance that was the background music of his life, was fading, and with each passing day, the loss felt more absolute, more terrifyingly permanent. He found he could not bring himself to change the linens. He was living in a museum of a life that had just ended, and he was its sole, lonely curator, wandering through rooms filled with the ghosts of laughter and quiet conversation. Without him, the trooper said, she wouldn't have made it through the night. He saved her life, no question. And then, Arthur saw it. The final sentence. The name of the truck driver, Daniel Petrov. The world tilted on its axis, and then slowly, painfully righted itself. 40 years. This had happened 2 years before he'd even met Eleanor at a friend's barbecue in Hackensack. She had never, not once, mentioned it. Not the accident, not the terror, not the broken leg, not the man who had saved her life. This wasn't a story of infidelity. It was a story of survival. The secrecy was still a puzzle, a wound, but the grotesque theory of an affair dissolved, replaced by a profound and bewildering sense of awe. This secret wasn't born of betrayal, but of gratitude. A debt she felt she owed, paid in quiet $100 installments for the rest of her life. He sat there in the silent house, the frail piece of newsprint in his hand, feeling the entire emotional landscape of the past month shift beneath him. The anger, the suspicion, the bitterness, it all receded, leaving behind a vast, aching tenderness and a new question. Why had she never told him? He had to find Daniel Petrov. Not for an interrogation, but for a conversation. He had to meet the man who had given him the 45 years he'd had with Eleanor. He needed to look him in the eye and perhaps finally understand the last great secret of his wife's heart. 2 days later, Arthur was on the road. He packed a small overnight bag, programmed North Creek, New York into his car's GPS, and left a note for Sarah on the kitchen table. Gone for a drive to clear my head. Don't worry, love, Dad. He didn't tell her about the clipping. This was a pilgrimage he had to make alone. The drive north was a journey through time. As the dense suburbs of New Jersey gave way to the rolling hills and sparse forests of upstate New York, he felt as though he were driving back into Eleanor's past, into a part of her life that existed long before him. The highway hummed a steady, meditative tune. He thought about Eleanor, the young nurse, her whole life ahead of her, driving on a dark road in a blizzard. He pictured her car spinning on the ice, the terror she must have felt, the crushing cold. He saw a ghost of a man, a hero he'd never known, pulling her from the darkness. He was meeting a man who was an integral part of his own life story, a man whose existence had made his own happiness possible, and until a few days ago, he'd never even known his name. The miles wore on, and his resolve began to fray. By mid-afternoon, he was tired and pulled into a roadside diner, the kind with cracked red vinyl booths and a jukebox in the corner. A young waitress with a kind smile and tired eyes took his order for coffee. She reminded him a little of pictures of Eleanor at that age, the same earnest set of her jaw. They made small talk. She was a student at the local community college, studying to be a radiology tech, working 2 jobs to pay for it. "It's tough," she said with a shrug, refilling his cup. "Some days I feel like I'm running on empty, but it'll be worth it." He saw in her the same quiet determination Eleanor had possessed. He left her a $20 tip for a $2 coffee, a small, anonymous act of generosity that felt, in some strange way, like a tribute to his wife. It was the sort of thing she would have done. Back on the road, he felt a bit more settled, but as he got closer to North Creek, the main roads gave way to smaller county routes, poorly marked and winding through dense forest. He took a wrong turn, ending up on a gravel road that seemed to lead nowhere. It was getting dark. A light rain began to fall, tapping a nervous rhythm on the roof of the car. Frustration and a familiar sense of being lost washed over him. He felt a moment of panic. This was insane. He was a 69-year-old widower chasing a ghost based on a 40-year-old newspaper clipping. He should be at home, grieving in a normal way. He was about to turn around when he saw a single light ahead, a dusty general store, its windows glowing weakly in the twilight. An old man with a long white beard sat behind the counter, reading a paperback. He looked up over his spectacles as Arthur entered, bringing a gust of damp air with him. "Evening," he grunted. "Good evening," Arthur said, feeling foolish. "I seem to be a bit lost. I'm looking for a man named Daniel Petrov." The old man closed his book, marking his page with a finger. He studied Arthur for a long moment. "Danny? Sure, I know Danny. Quiet fella. Lives up on the mountain. Why you looking for him?" His routines, once a source of comfort, were now a series of painful reminders. He'd make coffee in the morning, his hand automatically reaching for 2 mugs from the cupboard, her favorite, a heavy ceramic one with a slightly chipped rim that he'd always meant to throw away, before stopping, his fingers hovering over the porcelain handle. The gesture was pure muscle memory, an instinct carved by nearly 5 decades of shared mornings. "An old family connection," Arthur said vaguely. The man nodded slowly, seeming to accept the answer. "Well, you took a wrong turn at the fork about 3 miles back. Easy to do." "Danny, he had a bad accident with his leg years back. Logging truck. Crushed it pretty bad. Don't get around much anymore. Lives a simple life now. Good man, though. Solid." The old man gave him a new set of clearer directions. Arthur thanked him, his heart a little lighter. Daniel Petrov was becoming more real, a man with a history, a bad leg, a reputation for being solid. He was no longer just a name on a piece of paper. He arrived in North Creek in the late afternoon. It was a small, quiet town nestled in a valley, with a single main street and a collection of old Victorian houses. He finally found the road the storekeeper had mentioned, 28N, and drove deeper into the mountains. The road narrowed, winding alongside a rushing river. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall pines, dappling the pavement in shifting patterns of light and shadow. He felt a nervous energy building in his chest. What would he say? How do you thank a man for a gift he doesn't even know he gave? Then he saw it. The blue mailbox with a hand-carved bear standing sentinel on its post. He turned into the long gravel driveway. At the end of it sat a small, well-kept cabin with a curl of smoke rising from a stone chimney. An old 3-legged golden retriever raised its head from the porch and gave a single, unenthusiastic thump of its tail against the wooden planks. A man emerged from the cabin, wiping his hands on a rag. He was tall and lean, with a shock of white hair and a face etched with the lines of a long, hard-working life. He walked with a noticeable limp, his left leg stiff. This had to be him. Arthur got out of the car, his own legs feeling unsteady. "Daniel Petrov?" he asked, his voice hoarse. The man squinted at him, his blue eyes wary but clear. Who's asking? Arthur took a deep breath, the crisp mountain air filling his lungs. My name is Arthur Penright. My wife, my late wife, was Eleanor Vance. He watched the name land. He saw a flicker of confusion in the man's eyes, a searching of deep memory, then a slow, dawning recognition that traveled across 4 decades. Daniel's expression softened, the hard lines around his eyes easing. Eleanor, he said, the name a soft, wondrous echo from the distant past. The nurse, in the snow. He gestured with the rag toward the porch. You'd better come inside. The inside of the cabin was simple and warm, smelling of wood smoke, coffee, and old books. Daniel poured 2 mugs of black coffee from a percolator on the stove, and they sat at a rough-hewn wooden table. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the ticking clock on the wall and the soft snores of the 3-legged dog. Arthur didn't know where to begin. It was Daniel who spoke first. I remember that night like it was yesterday, he said, his voice a low rumble. He stared into his coffee cup as if seeing the memory there. Worst storm I'd ever seen. I was just a young guy, 25 maybe, trying to make a living, hauling logs. Almost drove right past her. I don't know why I looked down that ravine. Just a speck of red light blinking on and off in the trees. He looked up at Arthur. She was so cold. Her skin was blue. I thought she was gone. She kept trying to thank me, even though her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely speak. He shook his head, a faint smile touching his lips. She was a fighter. I never forgot her. Always wondered what happened to her. Hoped she had a good life. This was it. Arthur reached into his briefcase and pulled out a copy of the brokerage statement. He slid it across the table. She did have a good life, Arthur said quietly. We had a daughter, Sarah. Eleanor was a wonderful nurse, a wonderful mother, and she never forgot you either. This is for you. Daniel picked up the paper, his calloused fingers stained with what looked like engine grease, tracing the columns of numbers. He put on a pair of reading glasses that were sitting on the table. He looked at the final balance, then at Arthur, his face a mask of utter disbelief. What is this? Some kind of joke? A scam? It's no joke, Arthur said. For 32 years, from the time our daughter was born, Eleanor put aside money every single month. She invested it for you. She left a letter I found with my lawyer. She said that you gave her a life, a future. You gave her the chance to be a mother, to be a wife. You gave her me, and you gave her Sarah. And this was her way of saying thank you. Daniel stared at the paper, then back at Arthur, his clear blue eyes glistening. He shook his head slowly, speechless. He'd stand there for a full minute, his arm outstretched, feeling the foolishness and the profound emptiness of the moment, before slowly retracting his hand and taking only his own mug. He'd catch himself turning to share a headline from the newspaper. Can you believe this, Ellie? Or comment on the brazenness of a squirrel on the bird feeder, only to have the words die in his throat, caught by the suffocating silence. The silence was the worst part. I just pulled a girl out of a car, he just stammered, his voice thick with emotion. That's all I did. I didn't do anything to deserve this. I'd have done it for anyone. Eleanor thought you did, Arthur replied, and in that moment, a profound sense of peace settled over him. He finally understood. For Eleanor, this wasn't about charity. It was about balance. It was an entry in a cosmic ledger only she could see. A life saved, a life given, a debt of gratitude paid in full. The money wasn't a reward, it was an acknowledgement. They sat in silence for a long time, 2 old men from different worlds, bound by the memory of a woman they had both, in their own ways, loved and been touched by. In Daniel's humble cabin, surrounded by the quiet dignity of a simple life, Arthur finally understood the full, magnificent dimension of his wife's heart. Driving home the next day, the world looked different. The colors seemed sharper, the air cleaner. The heavy weight of suspicion and betrayal that had crushed him for weeks was gone, replaced by a feeling of lightness, of clarity. He had not lost his wife to a secret lover. He had discovered a new, hidden depth to the woman he adored. Her secret wasn't a wall that had divided them, but a hidden room in the mansion of her heart, a room filled with a quiet, powerful gratitude he was now privileged to see. He finally understood her philosophy on money. It wasn't just a shield. It was a tool. It was a current. It was a way to write a story, to send a message across time, to say thank you in a language that would last a lifetime. His spreadsheets could measure interest and returns, but they could never measure this. This was Eleanor's calculus, and it was beautiful. When he got home, Sarah's car was in the driveway. She rushed out as he pulled in, her face etched with worry that quickly turned to relief. "Dad, where have you been? Your note, I was so scared." He hugged her, a real strong hug for the first time in weeks, burying his face in her hair. "I'm okay, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick. "I'm more than okay." That evening, he sat with her at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd confronted her with the statement and told her everything. He showed her the yellowed news clipping, told her about the drive, the diner, the general store, about the cabin in the mountains, and the humble, bewildered man with the three-legged dog. As he spoke, he saw his daughter's understanding of her mother deepen, just as his had. The secret, now shared, was no longer a burden. It was a legacy. It was the final chapter in the story of Eleanor Penright, a story of quiet courage, profound gratitude, and a love that expressed itself in the most unexpected of ways. They cried together, not just for the loss of her, but for the astonishing beauty of her life. In the weeks that followed, Arthur found a new equilibrium. The sharp edges of his grief began to soften into a dull, manageable ache. He started working in his garden again, tending to the tomato plants Eleanor had loved. He called George and they met for coffee, and Arthur, without sharing the details, apologized for shutting him out. But something fundamental within him had shifted. One evening he found himself back in his study, looking at his own carefully managed retirement accounts, at the neat columns of figures. For the first time, they felt incomplete. The numbers were clean and logical, but they were missing a variable: meaning. A few months later, he sat down with his financial advisor and made a change to his own will. He set up a perpetual nursing scholarship at the local community college in Eleanor's name. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to help a few struggling students every year, to give them the same chance his wife had been given. It was his way of keeping her story and her philosophy alive. Money, he now understood, isn't just for surviving old age. It's for living a life that has meaning until the very end. Eleanor had taught him that with her final, beautiful secret. Legacy isn't only about the wealth you leave to your family. It's about the values you embody and the lives you touch, sometimes in ways no one else will ever know. He had spent his life building a fortress of numbers, while she had been quietly building a bridge. It wasn't just an absence of sound. It was a physical presence, a weight that pressed in on him from all sides. It was in the empty passenger seat of the car, in the unanswered echo of his own footsteps on the hardwood floors, in the vast empty space of their shared bed at night, where he now slept diagonally, trying in vain to fill a void that was both physical and infinite. On a Tuesday afternoon, gray and drizzling, he decided to tackle her books.